Australia are being asked to sign up to a new smartphone app designed to save lives. Here's more on that revolutionary app.
Keith Young is alive today thanks to his paramedic neighbor, Darren Murphy, and a smartphone app.
I went into the kitchen to start preparing dinner for that evening, and all of a sudden I was carving meat. The next minute I was blacked out. Didn't remember a thing.
Keith was on the floor, totally non-responsive, and he was already turning grey.
The 52-year-old had suffered a cardiac arrest, and time was of the essence.
Got on my push bike and grabbed a pair of gloves out of my first aid kit in the garage and rode up the street to Keith's house, where his family were already doing CPR to Keith on the floor.
Murphy responded to an alert on the Good Sam app, which calls on registered off-duty first aid responders to help if they're nearby.
When we send an ambulance to that address, it at the same time identifies bystanders, up to 3 bystanders who are close to that cardiac arrest.
Responders will get the call if they're within 440 yards of the patient in Melbourne and a little over 3 miles in country areas.
Rolling this out more broadly, I think is going to do wonderful things to save lives and to change lives.
Around 100,000 trained professionals are expected to join the Good Sam app. This will include firefighters, doctors, nurses, lifeguards, and paramedics. Young's experience has given him a new lease of life, and he has a newfound appreciation for waking up in the morning.
With a big smile. Get up and have breakfast and then look at the day and say, what are we doing today?
Some days he's simply giving thanks to his Good Samaritan.
This year's Electronic Entertainment Expo in Los Angeles saw hundreds of new games and trailers and an eyebrow-raising apology. One America's Louis Schuler has more on how video game companies are vying to adopt a business model in an ever-changing industry.
It's hailed by game developers as one of the biggest video game conventions in the world, the Electronics Entertainment Expo, or E3, in Los Angeles. But this year's showing cast a familiar shadow over how games are sold to the public, which was evident after one prominent game developer called DICE issued an indirect apology for tacking on in-game purchases on top of the initial asking price for Star Wars Battlefront 2.
We launched our games in November of last year, and clearly we didn't get it quite right. So instead of coming out of the gate sprinting like we really wanted to, we had to take a step back and make sure that we were delivering the game that our players really wanted.
Their answer? Get rid of the problem altogether in a different game under their watch called Battlefield.
You will all go on an expanding journey through the Second World War. No loot boxes, no premium pass.
But experts are saying that does not necessarily mean publishers will shy away from this business strategy entirely. Indeed, as it becomes more costly to make video games, due largely to increasing demand for higher quality, corporations will need to adopt a new business model.
So, the bottom line is that these loot box things, it's an innovation that maybe isn't working. But that doesn't mean the industry isn't going to try to figure out new ways to get people excited to pay for the games. Because these games are getting more expensive to run, they're getting more expensive to make. It doesn't work. So they need to make their money somehow.
Meanwhile, from a spectator's standpoint, E3 was very successful overall, with nearly 70,000 people in attendance. According to sources, the 3-day event boasted more gameplay footage than the previous year, showing the industry may be on the upward trend for the foreseeable future, as business leaders in the market try to grapple with how to sell their games and products in an effective and lucrative way. Louis Schuler, One America News.
Travelers nowadays can fly non-stop from Dallas to Sydney, Australia in just 17 hours. But in the 1930s, prolonged air travel was still a rarity until two daring pilots changed things. Here's more on the historic around-the-world flight which departed New York on this day in 1931.
Now we're all ready to leave, and the route we'll follow will be from New York to Harbour Bridge to Berlin, Berlin to Moscow, Moscow to Irkutsk, Irkutsk to Khabarovsk, Khabarovsk to Nome, Nome to Edmonton, Edmonton to Cleveland, and Cleveland back to New York.
When put like that, it sounds like a simple plan. But considering the fact that in 1930, the record for a round-the-world flight was held by a Zeppelin instead of a plane, Wiley Post and Harold Gatty's journey sounds a little more daring. The pair took off from Roosevelt Field in New York on this day in 1931. But Post's journey started years earlier when he was a parachutist for a flying circus in his mid-20s. In 1926, an oil field accident claimed his left eye, but rather than harm his flying career, it kick-started it. Post used the settlement money to buy his first aircraft and soon became the personal pilot for oilman F.C. Hall, who owned a high-wing, single-engine plane called Winnie Mae. Post flew the aircraft to much success and won the National Air Race Derby from Los Angeles to Chicago. Once more, Post would call on Winnie Mae to help him travel a great distance on June 23, 1931. Post and Gaddy would travel more than 15,000 miles around the world in just 8 days, 15 hours, and 51 minutes, touching back down in New York on July 1, 1931, to a hero's welcome. But Post wasn't finished. In 1933, he repeated his flight around the world, but this time without Gaddy. Post and Winnie Mae completed the journey in 7 days and 18 hours, becoming the first person to fly around the world solo. But as much as aeronautical achievements would impact Post's life, they would also claim it. In 1935, he and his friend actor Will Rogers died in a plane crash after the engine of their plane failed shortly after takeoff in Alaska. But his achievements, including his historical flight that began on this day in 1931, still remain. So too does Winnie Mae. The plane resides in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
And Mexico moves one step closer to lifting the World Cup trophy in Russia after a hard-fought game with South Korea. Here's more on the game.
Carlos Vela's penalty.